Good evening. I'm excited to be here this morning. Oh, sorry. Last Sunday I had to preach, so I thought I was going to preach. But this evening I am here to talk about a very difficult subject, and nowhere else but in Holland.
What's right?
Because in Holland, when they tell you it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. So they've asked me to speak for 10 minutes on poverty and asked a very difficult question. What is poverty? Poverty defies a precise definition because it has many phases. It changes from place to place, from country to country, and from community to community. And so it is a very, very difficult subject to deal with. Originally, I decided I wasn't even going to try to define poverty because it is abstract in nature. However, I ultimately selected to use this one that I will give you because of its source. I have to use this quotation from the World Bank's Voices of the Poor, preparations for the World Development Report on poverty. And they said, poverty is hunger. Poverty is lack of shelter. Poverty is being sick and not being able to see a doctor. Poverty is not being able to go to school, not knowing to read, not being able to speak properly. Poverty is not having a job. It's fear of the future, living one day at a time. Poverty is losing a child to illness brought about by unclean water. Poverty is powerlessness, lack of representation, and freedom. The above reflects the widespread recognition that poverty is multidimensional. It is a broader concept in which insufficient income is one among many. So it's not only about the cash you have, but it covers a multitude of things because it can also be limited, having limited control of assets, powerlessness, voicelessness, discrimination, insecurity, humiliation, and physical weakness. The ways in which these deprivations combine are complex and diverse. And that is why it is difficult to try to define what poverty is. But we all know poverty because we see it on our television screens every day. We see the ravages of poverty every day in our lives. But what is the world's view of poverty? Of the poor? We view in the world, we view the poor from our own lenses and what you choose today as your team to be our filters. We filter information that we see or we hear, and then that is how we see poverty. For example, we label the poor. They are sick, they are dirty, they are helpless, they are nameless. They have become objects of our compassion, and we choose to do what we want to do to them, and we do it because we think that they are poor. But we, the non-poor, need to examine our own selves and the way in which we look at the poor. And so tonight, as Christians, whether we are Christians or not, our view of the poor should depend on our own personalities and our cultures from which we come from. We have a lot of lenses, we have a lot of filters that we have in our eyes that we cannot sometimes see properly. So for Christians, it is important to note that the poor are created in God's image. The poor have names. They are not just statistics. God has given them gifts or talents. God has a preferential option for the poor. So we need to ask God to help us to see the poor and their circumstances in a more true way. So, few points of attention as I conclude. The poor are always among others who are not poor. So you see that you raise the issue, how can there be a flat screen television in the house or in a poor community? The fact that a community is named poor community doesn't mean everyone in the community is poor. We need to be more humble in our judgments of the poor. The poor may not save, but this may be for the very good reason that their survival for that day depends on that money. So they are unable to save it because you save it and then it also sends you to an early grave. The view that the poor are ignorant and stupid does not survive informed understanding of who the poor are, because they have real depth of knowledge. And those of us who work in communities, when you sit and talk with the communities, you'd realize their understanding of local ecology, of traditional medicine, and a set of other things that happen in the community. In fact, I would like to posit that poverty is broad and complex, and as a result, we need to figure that out when we are trying to work with the poor. Poverty is also disempowerment. Fundamentally, it is a lack of power to exercise personal, economic, political, or social freedoms. So our approach should be empowering the community. We should not get engaged in handouts, but what we should do is to empower the community to take control of their own situations. Finally, I have to give you some 4 quotes. Poverty devastates families, communities, and nations. It causes instability and political unrest and fuels conflict. That was said by Kofi Annan, my countryman. The second quote that I like to say is by Jeffrey Sachs, a renowned economist. And he says, every morning, our newspapers could read, more than 20,000 people perished yesterday of extreme poverty. How? The poor die in hospitals that lack drugs, in villages that lack anti-malarial bed nets, in houses that lack safe drinking water. They die namelessly without public comment. Sadly, sad stories rarely get written. Third quote, witnessing the extreme poverty in remote parts of Africa can make you feel sad and powerless until you realize how little it takes to change these people's lives fundamentally in a sustainable way. It is doable if we want to do it. We should not get overwhelmed by what we see, but what we should do is let us work in partnership between rich and poor to improve the opportunities of all human beings to build better lives. Therefore, switch and take off the filters and see the poor in a true sense. Thank you.